Haters Podcast. I am Chris Chase, and today we'll be talking about the Redskins, although not as much the game, because that played out exactly as anybody with a set of eyes could have figured, including Sherm Lewis, who was another set of eyes. There was really no doubt that was happening. My prediction before the game had been 31-6, and it wasn't far off. The Redskins scored a garbage touchdown to make it 27-17, but they got blown out in a game in which the Eagles' offense really did little other than make two big plays. Donovan McNabb is god-awful. He throws the balls either at his receivers' feet or above their hands, outstretched above their head by like 3 or 4 yards. He's awful. That was a delight to watch. That game actually pretty much went exactly as I hoped it would. The defense played well. The things that needed to be exposed got exposed. And Daniel Snyder's a laughingstock in the national press, and that's the only way that change is going to come to this team, is for there to be real embarrassment. And the other way for the change to be implemented is fans not showing up at the game. And last night was a perfect example of that. The stadium wasn't empty, but there was tons of empty seats, way more than there ever should be. The bottom level didn't look as empty because people were standing up, so you couldn't see the empty seats. The upper deck was just, there were pockets of the upper deck where there was no one sitting. Dan Steinberg estimated 80,000 today. I think he was being generous. I'd say 75,000 max, maybe 70,000. And then after halftime, it thinned out pretty great. But my big problem today is it's actually going to be another defense of Snyder, although it's not a defense of Snyder at all. But there's been a lot of talk, and everywhere you go in the D.C. area this past week, there's been signs asking for Snyder's firing. I was stuck in traffic yesterday on the D.C. Beltway on the outer loop, and I'm coming home, and it's a slow down where it normally is. It's kind of a big bend, and I'm trying to figure out why we're slowed down at 2:30 in the afternoon. And about 3 or 4 minutes later, we come to an overpass, and people have been slowing down because there was a sign dangling from the overpass that said, "Snyder must go." And once people got past that sign, they all went on. Today, coming home in Bethesda, Maryland, there was a construction site, and there was a sign hanging down from like the 3rd floor. They had the scaffolding up, and it said, what did it say? "Love Skins, hate Snyder, he must go," or something like that, showing that we love the Skins and we hate Snyder. So these signs are everywhere. Last night there was a lot of those signs brought into the stadium, and they were confiscated, and people were thrown out. Go to Mr. Irrelevant, I'll link to it. Go to Mr. Irrelevant for a pretty good story about someone bringing in a sign and getting thrown out. And on the DC Sports blog, Steinberg writes about people who were getting thrown out wearing t-shirts that says "Snyder sucks" or "F Vinny" or all these kind of things. Some of these people are complaining that their free speech rights are being violated and yada yada yada. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether this is good business practice to prevent fans from expressing themselves. We're not going to get into that, because it's probably not good business practice. You should probably just weather the storm, let them say what they want to say, let it peter out. Don't give people a cause, because now this is going to turn into something and people are going to be trying to sneak things in, and it's going to become a big story. You kind of let this play out, let it quietly, these people quietly wear their shirts and bring their signs in, and that won't be an issue. But that's not the way they do things, because everything they do is wrong. What I take issue with is that this is a free speech issue. It has nothing to do with free speech. The second you walk in the gates of FedEx Field, you give yourself over to the rules and regulations of the stadium. It's printed on the back of the ticket. I have a ticket here from last year. It says, "By tendering this ticket, ticket holder consents to a reasonable search for items that are not permitted in the stadium and waives any related claims ticket holder may have against the NFL, its member clubs, including the Washington Redskins, and their respective affiliates and agents. If the ticket holder elects not to consent to these searches, ticket holders will be denied entry." I'm a legal major, or legal scholar, I should say. That sounds to me like if you don't follow our rules, you can get the hell out. This has nothing to do with free speech. This is not about ability to assembly or a right to say what you want. You don't have that right. When you walk into a stadium, you turn yourself over to what they tell you to do. It's the same thing as the NBA draft and how today Buzz Bissinger, the infamous blog hater who got into that spat with Will Leitch on the Bob Costa show a couple years ago about blogs, and he criticized AJ Delario in particular and Big Daddy Drew, who frankly both should be criticized for. He talked about how the NBA, and he exposed today some of the fallacies involved in the argument that the NBA draft age restriction and in what it stands for. And I didn't really read what he said, but I heard he made some good points about how it's sort of BS. And you know what? It is BS. He's right. The NBA doesn't bar 18-year-olds from coming in because they want them to get a good college education or yada yada yada, or whatever the hell the reason is. They don't want them to come into the NBA because it's all about marketing. It's all about, as it all boils down to, money. Kevin Durant coming into the league as a high school senior isn't going to have as much interest as Kevin Durant coming in as the guy who was on Texas for a year and everyone watched play college basketball. Greg Oden, the same thing. These guys get followings in college, you know who they are, and it makes the NBA infinitely more marketable to have great rookies who you already know. It took Dwight Howard years to turn from, even though he was the number one pick in the draft, it took years for people to accept him as this star because we didn't know who he was. And even though he was in the NBA, he was in the NBA 1 year. Being in the NBA 1 year versus being in the college 1 year is completely different. Because in college, you're the man. The first year in Orlando, Dwight Howard wasn't as much the man, so people who aren't hardcore NBA guys didn't know as much about Dwight Howard as they would have had he played college basketball. If you look at all the all the high school guys who got big, Kobe, Tracy McGrady, Jermaine O'Neal, took them a long time to develop the sort of national following and national recognition that they would have had they played college. There's one notable exception to this, and it's LeBron James, but that's a whole different thing. LeBron had media from when he was 13 years old, so that doesn't really count. But to say that it's these guys' right to be in the NBA is not correct. It is a collectively bargained thing between the players' union and the league, or the association, that players who have not, I don't know, is it 19 or is it 1 year out of high school, whatever. But it's a collectively bargained thing. It has nothing to do with your rights, okay? This doesn't have to do with why we fought the Revolutionary War, okay? Samuel Adams wasn't sitting at the Constitutional Convention so Bernardo Sidney could play in the NBA. That's not what that was about. Nobody's rights are getting trampled on because a freshman in college can't go play in the NBA, and nobody's rights are getting trampled on because you can't wear a t-shirt that says "Screw Snyder" to the stadium. If you don't want to follow the rules, don't go to the game. If you feel so strongly about getting your "Screw Snyder" message across, why don't you actually do it, hit him where it hurts in the wallet, and don't go to the game? That's why I didn't go to the game last night. I had no desire to sit there and give money to Daniel Snyder and have my body be in the stadium and even just tacitly give support to a team that doesn't deserve my support right now. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop giving my support at home or to friends and family or to people I talk to. Doesn't mean I'm any less of a fan than I was last week. But Dan Snyder doesn't deserve to have people go to his stadium and support the team he has destroyed. Does that tie into people not being able to wear shirts? I don't know. But I just don't want to hear people making excuses. And in the defense of a lot of people, for instance, the guest post written on Mr. Irrelevant, there was no complaints there. The guy knew it was against the rules, and he got tossed out of the stadium. He was trying to talk some sense into the security guards he wrote, but they weren't having it. They're doing their jobs. That's just what they're told to do. As for the game, I think the best part about the game was that the Redskins passed on Deshaun Jackson 3 separate times last year for 3 pass catchers. And I know they wanted tall guys, but Deshaun Jackson gets the ball in his hands and he makes something happen. The Redskins have no one on their roster who can do the same thing other than Chris Cooley, which is a different kind of thing, and now Chris Cooley's out for the year, which is a perfect end to a perfect evening in D.C.